Well, our second last speaker is Mr. Jason Steinberg, who is a sustainability specialist at SAP. And before actually meeting him online, arranging for this talk, I didn't realize you could put sustainability and SAP in the same sentence. But I guess he'll explain a bit more about that. In keeping with his expertise, Jason is, of course, a committed environmentalist. And in fitting that mold is a fitness freak. And so the fun fact is that Jason's actually going to be running the New York Marathon next month. So, Jason.
Great. Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, so I'm going to start with a definition, and I get this question a lot. Companies that are thinking about better integrating sustainability into their strategy or into specific initiatives want to know a little bit more about what is sustainability. And there's a lot of different definitions, but since picture speaks 1,000 words, this is some people's definition of sustainability. That classic polar bear balancing on the last remaining iceberg out there as climate change takes over and changes its habitat. From an organizational standpoint or a business standpoint, this is not my definition of sustainability. Sustainability is basically balancing environmental, social, and economic perspectives. And so if you take this as an example, if an organization or a group says, okay, we want to save the polar bears and we want to push some money that way to try to preserve habitat and so on, if this isn't kind of cost effective, the next person on that board or managing that company or running that initiative, they can just say, you know what, it's not cost effective, so we're going to pull it. It's not sustainability. So really the importance is managing and balancing the three elements of those kind of bottom line. So what is sustainability from a business or kind of a triple bottom line standpoint? Anyone know what this is a picture of? Yeah, exactly. So the Gulf oil spill this summer, the BP oil spill and so on. So this was before the platform sank, before hundreds of millions of gallons of crude oil was spilled into the ocean and so on. People lost their lives. Incredible environmental disaster and so on. So is this sustainability? Well, this is kind of definitely a risk management failure. So some people talk about how this is kind of a 1 in a million chance. But when something leads to a multi-billion-dollar cost, 1 in a million should still have some mitigating factors involved. Was this an enterprise reporting failure? Clearly, if senior management knew this type of situation could arise, they probably would have been a little bit more proactive and so on. So it was definitely kind of a technology mismatch on that front. Did it affect their license to operate? Again, this single disaster could have. So at the height of it, Barack Obama was talking about not allowing BP to set up any new drilling and operations and so on. Again, from one single incident, led to a huge price tag. So on top of the multi-billion-dollar cost around the cleanup and the environmental disaster, there was a huge impact to BP's market capitalization, and something like 1/3 to 1/4 of it was wiped out, around $90 billion. So again, this is kind of the face of sustainability from a corporate and environmental standpoint, and to a limited extent, much more. So getting back to technology and climate change, the next slide I'm going to put up is kind of the anti-lightning presentation slide. So just bear with me a little bit here. This is kind of climate change in one slide, and basically going from kind of left to right maps all the processes that lead to greenhouse gases worldwide. So going from left to right, energy, land use change, agriculture to waste, and then kind of in the center you could see the end use activities. So everything that you do, buy, wear, have a presentation, anything that we do for business or pleasure and so on is mapped in one way or another here, from residential buildings, chemicals, cement, everything. And out the other end comes the impact. So whether it's carbon dioxide, methane or nitrous oxide, these are the contributors to climate change. And you can see kind of map technology as kind of driving one or many of these. So, looking back 100 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, before, we used fossil fuels, this wasn't a problem. And now with advances in technology and transportation and so on, you can see kind of where we are in terms of the climate change picture. So what is the answer? Well, the answer is also from the technology standpoint. So has anyone seen any of this? Stabilization wedges, is that familiar to anyone? No, okay. So on the graph on the left side basically is mapping out over the next 50 or 60 years where we are. So starting from 2010, you could see kind of our fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions and where we're going to go, that kind of straight line in one direction as the business as usual. So if we do nothing, that's where we're going to go, kind of continue up. Other environmental impacts, increasing impacts of climate change. And the solution is really around these stabilization wedges. So there's not one single technology solution. There are multiple solutions, and you can see them listed on the right side. And to a large extent, these are technology solutions that are available today. So everything from solar thermal, solar photovoltaics, wind power, vehicle efficiencies, biofuels, and others. This is technology that's available today. The problem is really around the political will and the environmental incentives behind it. So you can see kind of the technology side from the kind of contributors as well as the solutions. Now, there's also the supporting side. So there's a technology in terms of the solution, and there's also the supporting side. So for an example, SAP looked at their own emissions 2 years ago, and they also found out that 1/6 of global emissions was contributed by their own customers. 1/6, almost 20% was contributed by their own customers. Instead of kind of burying this, they said, well, since we run the systems of big companies all over the world, we have the data, why not switch our systems to help them better manage it and look for improvements in that side. Another example, Walmart, which was kind of a pariah from the environmental standpoint, also looked similarly. And what they looked at was their 100,000 suppliers and said, well, why not we use, so why don't we use technology to give our suppliers an edge? So developing a sustainability packaging tool and a sustainability index to allow us to only pick suppliers that either have a smaller carbon footprint, resource use, and ethical business practices on top of pricing decisions and quality decisions. So you can see how technology basically enables companies, even big companies, to really go from kind of environmental pariahs to, friends of the earth. Thank you. Questions?
Back with besides the spectrum of wedges,
Yeah.
do they order in any specific order, like most likely to happen? I'm just wondering why the kind of the order that they're in.
Yeah, not on this slide. And so you can see different slides where there's slightly different amounts. I think this slide was kind of just color coordinated and that type of thing. Probably, as I said, with the exception of the first one, all of these are kind of available technology. The first one that talks about carbon capture and storage is kind of a still to be tested, and that involves basically pumping the emissions from coal plants deep into the earth. So instead of spewing them into the atmosphere, you're burying them underground. Kind of a temporary solution, but a solution nonetheless. So no particular order.
I found this slide really interesting, but for example, with the biofuels, right? I mean, if the world's population from 2020 to 2070 is going to at a certain point, then the price to produce food and so forth, all those things are quite variable. So, I mean, I think it's a great representation. It's highly illustrative of the potential. How do you take into account those sort of, it's quite a straight line analysis, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of a simplified version. So, I mean, some of them are kind of more of a hockey stick over the last 100 years or so. So it's a simplified version. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of complexity in rolling out initiatives like this, and there are challenges around biofuels and so on. This one is talking about using biofuels from kind of non-food products, so kind of agriculture waste turning those into energy. So not some of the same trade-offs about, well, we're growing food as fuel, and we've got starving people. So there's a kind of a more specific end use around this, around using agricultural waste products for fuel. Yeah.
I was curious, like, in your opinion, you mentioned Walmart, and Walmart has the ability to be a game changer in a lot of this, or the big box stores. Are they potentially, and where they're going, good for the environment or bad for the environment?
Again, it depends on perspectives. I think they're making moves in the right direction. So as I kind of alluded to, they are based on a car culture, located in the suburbs, and so on. So there's definitely some sustainability challenges inherent in their business model. However, what they're doing is basically leveraging their power, which is the power to change the 100,000 suppliers, which is a large ecosystem, to do better things for the environment. So they're challenging them around, lowering their packaging, being more resource efficient, which will drive lower costs. But it's better for the environment. So they're making inroads in the right direction. But obviously their business model has a bit of is challenged from a sustainability standpoint. Yeah.
So, are there any initiatives that SAP has undertaken to this point that you could talk to at all? What things like perhaps demand response with power usage of some of their customers, or?
Yeah, so I have to breeze through a little bit of that kind of towards the end. So SAP looks at it from two standpoints. They look at it from a kind of an exemplar standpoint, so reducing their own kind of emissions from a kind of corporate standpoint, but they recognize that, as I said, their 85,000 customers have a much bigger impact. So then basically building software tools to help their customers measure and manage their environmental impact, measure their carbon impact, and so on. And since their software already manages most of the data that contributes to this, whether it's financial data, logistics, transportation, it's all there. And since knowledge is power, you just kind of have to feed that into the right interface, and then kind of bring it to the attention of the right people to make kind of moves in that sense.
I think there was one last question.
I was hoping you could speak to the level of demand increase from companies over the span of time you've been doing this kind of work. Have you seen a very big striking demand?
Yeah, so it's a journey for most companies, and there's a broad spectrum of kind of where companies are. So some are still in the kind of compliance state that they'll, kind of do what's legally necessary. Others kind of recognize that this is a source for kind of competitive advantage on the long term. I'd say it's still the minority of companies that are really leaders in this and taking kind of a proactive approach. In absence of regulation in kind of most sectors, with the exception of kind of some of the oil and gas and really heavy emitting sectors, there's still only a handful of companies that recognize this as kind of a real possibility for competitive advantage, either in terms of appealing to their customers, lowering energy costs, lowering waste, and so on. But it's still early on, and it's still probably happening a little bit more slowly than I would have thought.